Hey everyone, this is Sheri Austin, and in my newsletter, Coming in Hot, I told you about an amazing encounter that I had, but there is more to that story. It's kind of like a Paul Harvey moment, and here's the rest of the story. Hi, I'm Sheri Austin Anderson, and I'm here to tell you about a fantastic story that happened to me on March 1st. I was spending 10 days in Las Vegas with my son and daughter-in-law and my new grandson, and we just had a fabulous time. My son actually planned a day for the two of us to go off skiing up in Lee Canyon, and I hadn't been on skis in 15 years, so that was probably the highlight of the trip. But on my way home, I had a connecting flight in Dallas, and the trip went great from Vegas to Dallas, and then got on the Dallas leg to Orlando. And it was about this time of day, but we were descending in kind of the Jacksonville area when I smelled sulfur really bad in the cabin. And when I looked behind me, the entire cabin of the plane was filling with this white smoke. And then I wouldn't say chaos, but there was definitely a lot of concern because there was a fire in the cabin in the above compartment. And we had, thank God, a firefighter who sprung into action, and he just took control. They had water brigades of water bottles heading to the location where the fire was. The firefighter had pulled it out with his bare hands, put it in a bucket of water, and of course, this it was a battery brick that had actually caught on fire because there was an e-cigarette plugged into it, and then it had caught the other luggage and the overhead compartment on fire. And it was unbelievable. The cabin was filling with smoke, but for the most part, a lot of people stayed calm. And I can remember I was sitting in between this entire family. I had the father on one side of me, the mom in the aisle seat next to me, and then their children on the perimeter. And the father looked at me and he was like, "Aren't you afraid?" And I said, "No, I have Jesus." Because the whole time I looked over my right shoulder, this whole episode took place probably 5 or 6 rows back on the other side. And I just knew I had Jesus. I felt like I was in this bubble of peace. And then we had to make an emergency landing in Jacksonville. My last text to Donnie, because I knew he was already at the airport, was, the plane is on fire. Everything's okay, but we have to make an emergency landing in Jacksonville. And they asked us all to turn our phones off, and I think I was the only one that obeyed the flight attendants because everybody else was recording. But we landed safely, and we were met on the tarmac with the fire department. They came on board, checked everything out, and from then we just had to wait at the airport to see what the next steps were going to be, because we had to get our luggage and we weren't even sure if we were going to take off again. So we spent quite a bit of time in Jacksonville, and then we learned that they were going to get our luggage at one of the carousels, and we picked that up, and everybody kind of had to find their own way home. And thankfully I have family in Jacksonville. And my daughter-in-law's big sister picked me up and took me all the way to Buc-ee's in St. Augustine, and that's where Donnie picked me up. And I finally made it home by, I think it was like 10:30 that night. So several weeks later, we have a date planned on a Sunday afternoon to go to the Daytona Speedway, where they have the spring turkey rod run, which is a classic car event where it's kind of like a swap meet where people can bring in their classic cars for sale. People are selling parts and all kinds of different items for car enthusiasts. And we went to pick up a windshield for our neighbor. And so the whole day was planned out to go there first, and it's held at the Daytona Speedway. So it's just a great event. And as we were walking into the event, I said to Donnie, I said, I hope we get the opportunity to pray for somebody today. And here's one of the takeaways. God hears our prayers, and he definitely knows where we are and who he wants us to come in and have an encounter with. So we go to this event, pick up the windshield, load it up in Donnie's truck, and then we go back into the event just to look around. And then part of our plan for the rest of the day was to go have lunch at the Breakers in New Smyrna Beach. And it's one of our favorite spots to go. We love to sit on the perimeter where you can eat kind of like at a little ledge that looks out onto the ocean. And it's always a great spot to just have lunch and you could feel the fresh air coming in from the sea. And it's lovely. And so we get there about 1:30 and it is completely packed. There is not an open table. There's no open seating around facing the ocean, but there are seats at the bar. And years ago, that would have really bugged me because I'm like, oh my gosh, who's going to see me sitting at the bar? But we ended up sitting at the bar, had a great lunch, and right as we were finishing lunch, this gentleman walks up, kind of doing the same thing we had done like an hour earlier, looking for a place to sit. And we said to Donnie, I said, that's the guy. And he goes, that's the guy what? I said, that's the man that put out the fire on the flight that I was on several weeks earlier. He goes, are you sure? I said, I am positive it's him. So Donnie took off out the restaurant and back in the other side of where the gentleman was standing, and I couldn't even remember what his name was. And Donnie walked up to him and said, hey, excuse me, sir, but were you on flight 259? Spirit Flight 259, it had to emergency land in Jacksonville because of the fire that was on board. And he stood back and he's like, yeah, how did you know? And he goes, my wife, and he points to me across the room, was on that same flight. Donnie embraced the guy, thanked him for saving my life. And then there were two women that were just like, oh my gosh, this guy's amazing, because he obviously, saved the entire flight. And so they ended up coming around and sitting near us, and we were able to visit with them for about an hour and a half and just kind of go through the whole day and what had happened. They had been bumped from 3 or 4 flights in Vegas before they got on the flight that I was on. So they were on the original flight with me from Vegas to Dallas, and then from Dallas to, unfortunately, Jacksonville. And they have a business right in New Smyrna. And we just had the best time talking with them and recounting the whole event, because for the most part, like, everybody was, there was some people that panicked. There was a young girl that they had to usher into the front of the plane. But for the most part, there was like this peace and this, calmness over the entire airplane. And I had told them, I said, look, we're believers and we bring the kingdom of heaven with us. And the interesting thing about this gentleman, and his name is Rocco, who was the one that put out the fire, he is a 9/11 firefighter out of New York. What a hero. And he said every time he goes on an airplane, he lets the flight attendants know that he's a firefighter, and if they need anything, that he's there, constantly on guard, ready to serve and help his fellow man. And I'm just telling you, it was such a thrill to get to meet him in person and thank him. And then what was so cool is he and his wife were on that flight with me, and her name's Debbie. And as the day went on, and we were, Donnie was talking to Rocco and I'm talking to Debbie. And by then I had already prayed for Rocco. And see, that was what I had asked earlier to the Lord. Like, I just can't wait to see who I'm going to get to pray for today. Listen, God how he orchestrated that is absolutely a miracle. When you think of the millions and millions of people that are just in Florida, and here at the right time, at the right moment, at a bar or at the bar in the breakers, here is the guy that put out the fire on the flight that I was on. And Rocco had some health issues and a recent health scare right after this event. And I could tell he was a Christian. He had the crucifix around his neck. And I just told him, I said, you were supposed to be on that flight, like God has a plan for your life. And that day it was to put the fire out and for all of us to get safely home. I said, God has great plans for you. And we just had the best afternoon with Debbie and Rocco. And then as the guys were talking and I'm standing there talking with Debbie, she leaned in and she said, this is exactly what he needed today, was to run into you and Donnie. And I'm telling you, it just touched me so much because I thought, you know what? God sees us and he knows us, and he knew what Donnie's plans were to help our neighbor. And one thing just led to another. And then here we are at the breakers weeks later after we safely landed with a plane on fire, and we get to run into the guy that put it out and literally saved the day. So I am just in awe of what God has done and how he can use us right where we're at, no matter what we're doing. Here's some amazing takeaways from this unbelievable day. The thing that I've learned the most is God sees us no matter where we are or what we are doing. God hears our prayers. The simplest prayer that I had was, gosh, I hope I get to pray for somebody today. I'm excited to see what God's going to do. I think we need to expect God to do great things. And here, out of the millions of people in Florida alone, we walked all around the Daytona Speedway at that spring rod run, ran into some really nice people, but didn't feel led to pray for anybody. Then we go to New Smyrna. We're uncomfortable sitting at the bar, but it was part of the divine connection that only God could have orchestrated, where I run into that guy. And like Bonnie was like, what do you mean that guy? That guy, the guy that put out the fire on the that I was on. Only God. I'm telling you, God is amazing. He loves you, and he has an exciting life for us if we just follow him and trust him.